right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning for panel 6, Guarding the Machine, Preserving Human Agency and Market Integrity in the AI Era. I am Captain Mike Owen. I'll be your moderator for the panel this morning. I'm the Vice Provost for Warfare Studies at the Naval Postgraduate School, a career intelligence officer by way of submarines. So currently still on active duty Navy. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Alex Cocco, Dr. Andrew Tai, and Mr. Adam Bouffard. Alex, if you want to say a quick introduction for yourself.
I'm an energy and power systems engineer at the MITRE Corporation in the emerging technologies division.
Great, thanks. Andrew?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Tai. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the Defense Security Cooperation University, located here in Monterey, California.
Great, thanks. Adam?
Adam Bouffard. I am a principal analyst in our Center for Acquisition Management Sciences at MITRE.
Perfect. I just want to remind before we get started with the briefings, in the question and answer tab, please put your questions in there, and I'll be using those to moderate the conversation following the 3 briefs. At this point, I'll turn it over to Adam Bouffard for our first briefing. Adam.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Again, I'm Adam Bouffard. A little bit about myself. I have 20 years of experience in acquisition. I've been a contractor. I've been in 1102 with Naval Sea Systems Command and Office of Naval Research. And over the last 11 years, been with MITRE, working with DOW and a bunch of civilian agencies. So a wide breadth of acquisition experiences there. I am here to present our joint paper between the Department of Veteran Affairs, NDIA, ETI, MITRE, and our industry partner. The paper is entitled Keeping Humans in Command, Preserving Human Agency in AI-Driven Federal Acquisition. And the thesis of this is basically AI should accelerate acquisition, but humans must remain in command. So next slide. So just an overview of what we're going to be looking at here. We're going to start with the AI to AI paradox and why the human agency matters. The risks of AI, the AI acquisition after that. We'll get into the meat of the research paper, which is the Human Agency Assurance Framework, the HAF that we have within the paper, how the HAF can be implemented, so a practical roadmap for integrating HAF into acquisition processes, et cetera. And then we'll take a look at the real-world impact and recommendations that we looked at within our report. Next slide, please. Okay, so the AI to AI paradox. So when we were looking to do research for this symposium and different topics, one of the sort of elephants in the room was the 2 ecosystems that seem to be converging with the use of AI, right? So you have government using AI for a multitude of things. You'll see here market research, requirements generation, proposal evaluation. Those are some of the heavy hitters. And then on the other side of the house, in the industry ecosystem, you have proposal writing, pricing optimization, compliance automation, things like that. So when you're looking at it, you're thinking to yourselves, okay, now the government is generating requirements, evaluation criteria, RFPs, industries responding to those with proposals and pricing optimization and things like that AI is generating. So now essentially you have an ecosystem converging on AI evaluating AI, right? So that's not good for source selection. That's not good for pulling the human agency out of acquisition. So we're looking for keeping human agency in, and why do we want to do that, right? You want to keep the ethical judgment. You want to keep contextual understanding, the subject matter expertise that goes with years of experience in acquisition, and technical subject matter expertise, things like that. You obviously want to have accountability. If the AI is looking at the AI and then the AI generates the response, then where's the accountability within that? Obviously, you want to keep mission alignment, and then the most important thing, obviously, warfighter perspective, right? You want to make sure that the warfighter perspective is kept in there. The human agency allows for that. So if you have this paradox, then essentially humans are not the decision makers. It may increase efficiency, but human judgment will decrease, and that risks trust and defensibility, mission failure, and just accountability overall. So essentially, this is the paradox that led to us to create the framework that we have within our report. So next slide, please. This one, we're going to review some of the risks that are around it. So essentially, all these risks are not isolated, they compound, right? So it becomes a systemic risk. So if AI favors past winners, you're looking at bias amplification. If industry optimizes to match, you're looking at proposal homogenization, right? Evaluators trust the outputs, don't verify, don't keep the human in the loop. You're looking at loss of human judgment. And then you also have on top of that, the opaque decisions out of black box outputs. So all of these risks compound in that AI to A environment. So how are we going to control that? And how are we going to keep that from reducing innovation, competition, and mission effectiveness, right? So it may be more efficient, but then it becomes fragile and unaccountable if you have too much AI built into it. So we thought through in our research and looking at different things, what can we develop? What could a framework be, a tiered system that we could use to help keep human in the loop depending on the risks associated with the acquisitions. So next slide, please. So we came up with the Human Agency Assurance Framework, the HAF. Essentially, this is a framework, and you'll see at the bottom it says includes. We have oversight thresholds, assurance gates, governance, policy and guidance, and workforce readiness. And our report delves into each one of these different 5 components that make up the framework. But essentially, this framework will ensure that bottom part, right? Human decision authority, keeping the human making the decision, making sure the human's verifying where they need to verify, and being involved in high-risk scenarios. So you have those top 2 pieces that we've already talked about in terms of industry may have an AI proposal, government may be using AI for evaluation tools, but you want to make sure that you're keeping the human in the loop and they're making the ultimate decision and doing it in a way that is impactful to the warfighter. You combine that with our tier tool sets on the right. So we have 4 different tiers here. We have tier 3, where it's administrative AI. AI may operate with minimal oversight, where it detect and correct and have negligible impact. And then you have tier 0, right? You might have a very risky acquisition, a very risky thing you're trying to buy for warfighters. You might have, human fatalities or anything involved in it. In those, you may have automation prohibited, right? You can support AI, use AI to support drafting or retrieval, but it can't recommend or execute decisions. So those tiers are built into the framework that we have, along with those 5 components. It's essentially, it's not meant to stop AI. It's meant to govern AI intentionally. It keeps the humans accountable, and the AI remains assistive rather than replacing the human in the loop and being too involved in decisions that it should be. It fits very well into existing acquisition structures. And the key idea of being here, every AI capability must have a human control mechanism. So that's what we were looking for when we developed this framework. And on the next slide, we will look at how you can operationalize that framework. So if you focus on the right there, we have in here, the funnel, and the funnel is the decision funnel, talking through different ways that the AI can be involved. And then in the middle, you have the human approval points. But really, the 3 practical mechanisms that the HAF puts together are on the right. We've talked about the oversight tiers, the 4-tier approach that we used in terms of tiering it. Then you have the assurance gates, right? The validate, monitor, and audit. And then you have governance controls, which are AI oversight boards, contract requirements. And all of that leads to explainability and traceability, right? If you're going to use AI, you want to be able to explain how you use it, trace it to how you use it. And then that way you can avoid things like process and things like that. So the oversight tiers, not all AI is equal. So that's to identify if it's high risk, human is required. The assurance gates are validating before use, and then also monitoring continuously what these tools you're using are, how they're affecting things, are they still effective? And then, of course, we have the governance rolled in terms of contracts, policies, and oversight boards. So the key principle being here, AI can recommend, but humans must decide. So you'll see that throughout. That's the theme we have. But essentially, this framework with the mechanisms attached to the funnel and the human approval points, and that all leads to proper use of AI and making it impactful, but still keeping the human in the loop. So next slide, please. So real world examples, right? The paper wanted to look at, we've developed this framework, we've developed the tiered support. How can we look at real world examples that have occurred where this different tiered support could work? So the first one we looked at was Department of Veteran Affairs. They essentially used AI-enabled market research at scale. So they had 75 responses to an RFI. For those that have been through that before, typically you'll get your tech team together, you're all in a room, you're reviewing all 75 responses. They can be anywhere from 20 plus pages that you're reviewing all 75 of. And typically, you know, if you do all that and you capture it right and you get the administrivia and you put it in the documentation and the Excel sheets and whatever else you're using, you're looking at, you know, 8 to 12 weeks to get through that RFI if it's a lot of responses and a lot of pages that you have to process. So in this particular case, what would have taken 8 to 12 weeks, they reduced down to 2 to 3 weeks. And the main takeaway from it for this use of AI was you get a lot of fatigue having to go through, like, pull all the information down about the vendor that's responded, put it into a sheet, pull down like all the things that they put into it, do your analysis, capture your notes, put it in a report. So AI helped to supplement that a lot, and that avoids the analyst fatigue, right? And allows them to focus on impactful things, and that's what you want them to do. In this particular example, we tagged it as a tier 1 human in the loop oversight. So in our tiered support, it would be tier 1. All of the outputs were treated as preliminary, and it required mandatory human validation. So that with that human-led validation and insight, it allowed them to identify gaps, refining requirements, which essentially leads to better PWSs, better evaluation criteria. And beyond that, with AI alone, it could not infer those things that you need the human in the loop to do. So it allowed for, again, traceability, accountability, and impact, and they used AI as a force multiplier in that respect. The second example we have here is Acquire. That's MITRE's acquisition AI research environment. It's essentially a suite of micro tools along with subject matter expertise. It allows AI experimentation for different agencies and sponsors. It breaks through that cultural barrier of, you know, getting used to AI, and it's very tailored and user-friendly down into specific examples where they want to try out AI or use AI and then continue to expand on it and potentially go out to industry after that and procure AI tools once they're used to it and see the impacts of what it can do. So it uses it for decision support only. So they're narrowly scoped tools specific to certain things like RFIs, requirements development, evaluation criteria, things like that. The main thing that comes out of this one is the evidence tagging and traceability. So by wanting to keep the human in the loop, it will tell you like pages where they got the information from. You can go back and validate it. This enables you to audit things, have transparency, protest defensibility, and using the tool. And obviously it reduces the risk of hallucination and misinterpretation because the human's validating what the AI is outputting. And then at the bottom, you see cognitive augmentation with preserved judgment. So again, it reduces the evaluator workload. So we're not saying don't use AI. We're not saying you're not going to fit into these tiers. It's more so make sure you're using it appropriately. If it's high risk, you may want to take a little more caution, and you'll see sort of in our recommendations on the next slide where we were going with that. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so we have 4 of them highlighted here. The first one is that circuit breaker. That's essentially what I was talking about on the last slide is, you know, you establish predefined triggers. So if there's a low confidence score, drift detection, this looks like it could be a high risk of protest, you would automatically pause the AI-assisted acquisition processes wherever you're at in it and revert to manual evaluation. So this was critical for our HAF in terms of in-process failure. You want to make sure like, hey, we need to take a break. Maybe we don't trust these AI outputs. Where is it getting the information from? All of a sudden, we're not confident that what it's doing is correct. You can have that circuit breaker to sort of break it down. And that's built into your policies and procedures and things like that. The second one we had is an independent AI acquisition auditor. So this type of thing is, I'm sure, on the forefront coming. It could be in GAO, but essentially you're creating a neutral oversight function, and they will have the authority to audit AI use and acquisition. You know, analyze the protest trends that go along with that AI use and acquisition, publish the findings, publish ways you can use it better. And this ensures accountability beyond your internal governance structures, right? You have that independent third party who's looking at things, auditing across the agency, auditing across programs and projects. And that's something that you want to have in terms of making sure the AI is still being effective and making sure overuse and using it in risky environments isn't occurring. Policy integration, obviously, into the acquisition frameworks. We have all the rapid pathways that have come out, the push from the administration to use OTs. This could be used across all the MDAPs, but essentially aligning your AI oversight with the existing acquisition lifecycle controls that are in there and building those in will help to better use and make AI more impactful. And then finally, mandatory sunset and revalidation. Like this one may be a little early because we're sort of in the early stages of using AI tools and acquisition, but essentially you want to revalidate that the tool is being effective, that there's no obsolescence, there's no model drift, it's got long-term reliability and defensibility, and you have trust in using it in the acquisition environment. So you have mandatory revalidation that may result in sunsetting of that particular use of that AI tool. So these are four of the main recommendations that came out of the report, accompanied with the framework and the tiers and everything else that we have in there and the examples. Overall, what you're looking for, the final takeaway here again is AI should be a force multiplier for human judgment, but not a replacement. So in doing our research and looking through these frameworks, that's where the paper came to in terms of reporting out. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything like that. I think I'm a little early on time, but I'll turn it back over to you, Captain Owen.
Great, thank you, Adam, for that briefing, and we'll have time at the end for questions for Adam. So next we'll go to Dr. Andrew Tai for his paper on AI collusion in procurement auctions. Dr. Tai.
Great. Thank you, Captain. Thanks everyone for being here. Adam just delivered a great talk on safe AI interaction on both sides of the procurement market, so government and sellers. I'm happy to follow on with AI interaction solely on the industry side of the market. First, they did emphasize to me I have to say that there's a long list of people whose opinion this paper is not. This is not the opinion of the US government or the Department of War. This is solely my opinion, and any mistakes are solely my own. I hope this paper bridges the gap between basic research and applied research. I'll try to minimize the technical detail in this talk, though I might fail at that. Let me be clear on what this paper is and is not. I use modeling and simulation to investigate the risks from industry use of AI. The model is going to be simplified by design to really distill the risks and implications of that. What I'm about to present is not evidence of ongoing and present AI collusion among government suppliers. Next slide, please. Some background on this. Auctions accounted for at least $1.5 billion in US government procurement in 2017. So as the DOW goes, that's a drop in the bucket, but in absolute value, that's quite a lot of money. Auctions have clear use case for small or uniform contracts or commodities where the only dimension of choice is price. Next slide, please, or rather advance. But this leaves it really open to the use of AI algorithms by sellers. We see this documented in the private sector. For example, there's extensive use of AI pricing algorithms in online ad auctions. For example, Google sells ad space via auction, and the purchasers of those ads are implementing AI bidding for that. Another example is Amazon sellers. Often you have many sellers selling essentially the same product, and they'll use AI algorithms to price that to try to maximize their profit with minimal effort. Advance, please. A feature of AI algorithms that's kind of obvious is that they're implemented to try to maximize profit. But this leaves open the possibility of autonomous collusion between different firms. This is a theoretical possibility established in other market contexts, and I have some references. In the real world, this is allegedly the RealPage lawsuit. RealPage is the software for landlords to set rent, among other things. And there's that kind of prominent lawsuit alleging that they're helping landlords essentially collude to raise rents. What this has been shown, at least theoretically, is that sellers can extract multiple times more profit from the buyers than under the competitive conditions. Next slide, please. Right now, the number or the amount of value in US government auctions is fairly small, but I think there's going to be a greater use case for these in the future, meaning more small, frequent, uniform auctions in the future. For procurement, that's largely commoditized versus large, indivisible, bespoke contracts. I think we're already seeing this in kind of hotspots in Ukraine, where they're procuring UAVs, largely kind of piece rate and small contracts, treating them relatively substitutable. We might also see that in, for example, interceptor missiles. Another prominent example would be computing power for AI, where that's also already a pricing scheme. Suppliers of data centers will auction off computing power, and I think that's going to be a large use case for this for the government in the future. Next slide, please. One note on the word collusion. Under US law, collusion generally requires a meeting of the minds. In other words, there needs to be explicit communication to either divide the market or set prices among competitors. This paper adopts a broader definition, including tacit collusion. Next slide, please. This includes something like sustaining high prices by the implicit threat of later punishment. In other words, like severe undercutting of your competitors if they deviate. This is a pattern that's empirically documented. For example, among gas stations, if you pay really close attention to gas stations, there might be two on the same corner, and they start at a very high price, kind of stair step downwards, and then reset to a high price. So this is a pattern that's often documented in real life. Next slide, please. An implication is that activity like this, tacit collusion, particularly by AI algorithms that do not communicate with each other, may be difficult or impossible to prosecute. So this creates a really thorny policy issue. Next slide. Advance 2 more times, please. This paper setup, I'm going to do a very simplified reverse auction format and simulate some basic AI learning algorithms called Q-learning on this format. My findings are that the algorithms consistently collude at supra-competitive prices and extract on average 3 times the competitive profit. The implications are that, number one, real algorithms are likely to be much more advanced and thus even better at doing this. This would imply large cost increases to the government in using procurement auctions in the future if we have AI colluding in this way. This is likely to extend to more formats beyond reverse auctions. So Adam talked about AI drafting proposals or submitting proposals in lots of different settings. And this is likely to not be literally just auctions, but procurement in general. One big implication is that the risk of this is mitigated by increasing the number of firms, and that has clear implications for the defense industrial base. It's important not just to increase the number of firms to increase capability, but even maintaining the same capabilities across a wider range of firms really mitigates collusive behavior. The last implication is that non-artificial intelligence, in other words, humans, can also replicate this behavior. So this paper is really about 2 things. One is AI, and 2 is humans replicating this behavior. Next slide, please. Advance 2 more times. Thank you. So in this very simplified model, I'll have 2 firms competing in a reverse auction. In other words, the lowest bidder wins the contract. The bids will be in discrete increments from 0 to 1. The numbers are not super important. It's just to keep the environment simple. The Nash equilibrium, in other words, the competitive equilibrium, is that both firms bid 1/6 the lowest increment and obtain some small profit. I'll repeat this for 100,000 periods and let the learning algorithms kind of learn what to do, and then repeat that whole thing 100 times to show you it's not a fluke. Next slide, please. Okay. Just some technical details. I won't go too far into it. I'm training Q-learning algorithms, and really they learn what's called a Q matrix or a policy, and that's a function from the states, meaning what's the information available to actions, which is what should I bid currently. And they try to learn to maximize the discounted profit. Next slide, please. There's a bunch of equations I could show you, but I'll kind of tell a story about how Q-learning algorithms behave. Imagine you walk into this casino with a bunch of slot machines. Now, what's special about these slot machines is all of them give you a different probability of winning, and they have different prizes. Okay, so this is a very weird casino with a lot of weird slot machines. And furthermore, the slot machines behave differently depending on the weather. Okay. That's what Q-learning algorithms are really designed to optimize. It walks into this casino and it knows nothing. So the first thing it does, it just plays a bunch of slot machines randomly and keeps track of the data. What slot machines are winning at what time, under what weather. And eventually it learns, depending on the weather, what slot machine should I play at to maximize my profit. Next slide, please. Okay. One or two more times. Okay. So in this setting, each slot machine has different ex-ante unknown prizes, and it has different ex-ante unknown chances of winning. And the prizes and chances of winning change each day depending on what the weather's like. Next slide. Okay. The Q-learning eventually records the data from random plays and begins to learn what's the best slot machine. And we can apply that also to this auction format. It essentially starts by bidding random prices, and then learns what bids are best depending on the available information. The available information being the past history of bids, both from myself and from my competitor. Next slide, please. You can see here the bids over time. The dotted line is at the bottom is the competitive bid. So what we see here is that these AI algorithms start at a higher than competitive bid and kind of stay there and gradually increase the bids to even more kind of anti-competitive bids. Next slide, please. This is telling the same story. This graph is their profits over time. So the AI algorithms start at a slightly higher than competitive profit, but instead of converging to the competitive profit, they get more and more profit over time as they learn how to play the game better. The full profit that they could extract is 0.5, 50%. And they converge roughly towards 1/3. So they get a lot of the possible profit in this market. Next slide. And what's really interesting is that these AI algorithms are learning to do that independently. So they're not communicating with each other. And it's not like one competitor is telling the other, hey, let's just bid higher to cheat the government. That's not what's happening in these simulations. As they learn to play this game over time, they just learn that they should increase the bids steadily, and their competitor will kind of cooperate on that implicitly. What's also interesting is that this collusion, quote unquote collusion, is sustained by a threat of punishment. Advance the slide one more time. So this square is very special. This is kind of the equilibrium. We end up with both firms bidding at 2/3 out of 1. And what happens is this is really sustained by the threat of severe undercutting. I won't talk about this graph too much, but what you can see in this highlighted square is that as I'm bidding 2/3, if my opponent undercuts me and bids 1/2, then what I'm going to do is drive the price way down. That'll hurt me, but that's punishing my competitor. And again, none of this is explicit. These are all kind of computer behavior, and the computers have not been given explicit instructions to do this or to collude in any way. Next slide, please. And to show you this is not just a fluke of one simulation, I've repeated this 100 times. And here you can see essentially what's a 90% empirical confidence interval. So even at the low end, these AI algorithms are extracting almost half of the profit that's possible in this market. So quite a significant amount and way above the competitive amount of profit possible. So this is showing that this is not just one simulation, but this pretty much is happening every single time you run this simulation. So this is a very enduring effect. That's not just random. Next slide, please. And the last thing I want to show you is what happens if I increase the number of firms from 2 to 3. I'm contrasting this slide with the very previous one. The profit extracted is way lower. Okay. The bids are way lower and the profits are way lower. So increasing the number of competing firms, all of them using AI algorithms, really mitigates the risk from collusion. Here, the firms tend to end up bidding about 0.3, and that's in contrast to 0.5. So the costs to the government are way lower, and the amount of profit extracted by the firms is way lower. Next slide, please. So I'll conclude. In this repeated reverse auction environment, again, these are just simulations, but I think they really highlight the risks of AI usage in industry. These algorithms consistently bid super competitively, and they extract up to 3 times the profit versus the competitive market. Humans can do this too. Humans can also do this kind of tacitly, and that's been documented in the empirical literature. And really, under US law, there's no way to prosecute that. Advance the slide, please. One more time. One more time, sorry. The first order implication is that we really should expand the number of firms in the defense industrial base. And that'll be, that's my time. But I think the most important thing is to increase the number of firms to mitigate the risk of this. I'm here on the NPS campus. If anyone else is here, I'm happy to talk more, and looking forward to talking more with the panel after the next presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. All right, next we're going to go to Dr. Alex Cocco for his paper, An Actionable Framework and Interactive Web Application for Transitioning Technology to the Warfighter, the Transition Maturity Framework and Tech 2 PEO/PAE. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here on this panel today. Really, this work that I'm going to present is all about getting the best technology to the warfighters at relevant speed and at scale. And it was sponsored by the Operational Energy Innovation Directorate, which is under OUSW ANS, who, in addition to being a sponsor, is also a really great partner to us. They're actively using this framework in their organizational processes. I do want to mention at the outset, all of the stuff I'm going to present is also available online through MITRE's Acquisition in the Digital Age site, so you too can go on with it after the presentation. So go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the framework, which is the fundamental way that we're thinking about transition and how to get the right technologies to the warfighters faster. Then I'll go into some transition barriers and how we can use tools like Tech to PEO/PAE to help reduce them. And finally, to talk in line with the theme of the panel, I'm going to talk about some of the unique opportunities that TMAF presents in this AI era. And I'll end with a slide that can get you linked to our resources and get you started. So go to the next slide and go one more. So the challenge with technology transition is some breakthrough technologies, they can fail even if they're technically mature and you can produce them. And often what will happen is they might lack a clear alignment to an operational problem. Maybe the priority operational problem changes mid-development. There can be integration challenges, and they can also lack a warfighter willingness and ability to adopt. And what this framework is intended to do is introduce a common language for all of those leading principles and best practices that folks that work in technology transition are aware of into a standardized language so that we can get key stakeholders on the same page and move technologies through the pipeline more effectively. And so it's not only for programs to help them do that, but also for the innovators and developers themselves to become empowered to navigate the space more strategically. So if you go to the next slide. So the framework has a couple key attributes. It's intended to track the maturation of technologies from applied research on through transition to use. And it's meant to provide information needed by all stakeholders for the technology to be accepted as it goes through that process. It consists of standardized maturity scales, again, to establish that common language. And again, they're aligned to those stakeholder criteria so that as you move through your project or as you're managing a project, you can get a sense of, okay, which parts of the transition ecosystem do I need to engage with more, which ones I'm already good with, and you can revisit that continually. So for program managers, it's intended to offer standardized means to evaluate, balance, and monitor transition maturity. And for innovators, it's meant to provide an actionable framework for strategically evaluating partnerships and thinking about how they want to resource transition activities to make sure they don't fall into little technology transition ditches of death. So go to the next slide. So to do this, we wanted to distill the transition or acquisition ecosystem into something that's less complex and simpler. And if you think about it, you know, the innovation is kind of the first step. You have the innovator, And then as they try to push the technology out to the warfighter, they have to navigate the acceptance criteria of key stakeholder groups, which we boil down to 5 representative ones here. A simple way to think of this picture is if you look at the first two, the industrial-based production and the R&D, that's like, those folks are concerned with, does the technology reliably operate under the desired conditions? And can you produce it at the relevant scale and quality? On the other side, you have 3 stakeholders that represent the defense customer, elements of the defense customer: the acquisition program, so who's going to make the purchase, whose technical and financial baseline you have to integrate into. You have the requirements or operational problems. That's an evolving space right now, but the main idea is how aligned are you with a priority mission need, a capability need, or a gap, from at the lowest level to a broad national defense strategy, going up to more focused through like IPLs, and then more focused to capability need statements or GONs and JUONs that are not only more focused on a particular need, but also funded. And then finally, there's the warfighter. So that's who actually has to use this. And they will need the relevant training, the doctrine, all the things that go into making it possible for the warfighter to take the thing out of the box when it gets to the field. So if you go to the next slide, the transition maturity framework takes these stakeholder acceptance criteria and compiles them into 5 standardized 1 through 9 scales. The first 3 of those scales were already existing. So most people are familiar with technology readiness level and manufacturing readiness level. Those are kind of the R&D and industrial-based production stakeholders, with some crossover in the program. Basically, can it work, and can you make it and deliver it at the required scale and speed? Then there's the transition confidence level. This is somewhat of a lesser known scale, but it comes out of SOCOM. And that is measuring the level of engagement with the procurement partner of the program. Are you meeting with them regularly? Do you have a signed transition agreement? How strong is that agreement, etc.? And then in addition to that, so basically if you have those ones, you've made a technology, you can manufacture it, you have a strong relationship with the program. Then the other thing is, okay, does that technology align with a priority need that's funded? And do warfighters understand how to use it so that they actually want to use it? And that's where MITRE and OEI co-developed 2 novel readiness dimensions. One's the requirements readiness level, and the other's the warfighter readiness level. And these are really meant to, together, ensure that you make something that is operationally relevant, so it actually has impact in the field, and that it can be used, and there's the associated and doctrine. So the warfighter readiness level is very well aligned with the fundamental tenets of .mil-PFP, if you track that. And soon we'll have a software readiness level that we're introducing. So if you go to the next slide, now a key part of the framework is it's meant to be actionable, and this is a main point for OEI. They really want this to be something that has effect in real life. And so the levels each have a definition, and those can be thought of as milestones. So you've reached that level of maturity, but associated with them, we wanted to give transition critical activities. So these activities are meant to be representative actions that a development project could take, or that a program could look for as evidence of that project maturing to the next level. And so if you combine these 2 things across the 5 scales, you can have a framework that lets a project and a program think about how they'd roadmap from getting from their initial maturity state to some target state that would make them well lined up to hand off to the next funding partner. So to transition. So you go to the next slide. Like I said, this is in practice. OEI has rolled this out as of FY25 into their proposal solicitation, selection, execution management process. You can read more about that aspect in a Defense Acquisition Magazine article that we co-wrote together last fall. And a co-author actually in this paper, and on that paper, Ms. Ruth Ann Darling, who's the director, sums it up. It's all about getting the right stakeholders aligned, coordinated, and really focused on delivering the capability to the warfighter effectively and at speed. So if you go to the next slide, like I mentioned, you can get started with this right away. There's a website there of a QR code at the end. But now I want to shift to, okay, so you have the framework, and then we're engaging with development teams, with programs, and we're hearing about the barriers that they interact with. We're using that to make sure that this stays relevant in practice. If you go to the next slide, we start to hear, next slide, common transition barriers. One of which we'll talk about in relation to the Tech2PO/PAE tool, is just getting that first connection with a program. That can often be a big hurdle. Another one is, how do you know if your technology is aligned with a relevant or funded requirement? For that, we have a MVP tool that's up and coming called Tech2Rec. You input some details about your technology, and it searches a corpus of requirements documents and spits out where you might have alignment. And then finally, if you're just coming into the defense space and you want to communicate the mission or campaign level impact of your technology, that can be a high hurdle for folks that are less familiar with the space. So we've also been developing in partnership with OEI modeling and simulation tools that are lower barrier to entry or more flexible, so that if you're early in the development stage, you can think about what tweaks would have different impacts at those levels. And then it's something that, earlier stage development teams or ones that are less familiar to the defense innovation ecosystem or defense space can get up and running with. To the next slide. So I want to talk about Tech2PO/PAE. Again, you can get to this tool through our site. Go to the next slide. You'll come to a web application, and it will have the sidebar. If you go one more, you can work through your TMAF self-assessment through the site, so you can input your maturity levels. You don't have to do this, but it can be helpful to do this first. If you go to the next slide, then you type in something about your technology, and this is a natural language processing tool, so there's some query engineering here, so you want to put in as many of the relevant words as you can think of. And what it will do is first return the top 5 potential relevant acquisition programs. But one thing you'll find here is they often don't list a contact. So if you go to the next slide, in order to get some kind of contact, we also search SAM, the acquisition or the procurement records, or the contracting records. And this will find recent contracts that are somewhat relevant, not necessarily to get funded, but to get a contact that's in the relevant space. So this is likely going to be a contracting officer, but it gets you started. And then finally, if you go to the next slide, we also borrow some outputs from another MITRE tool called Prospect, where we look for program elements that might be related. And this is to give projects a sense of what the funding looked like in the last 2 years. So you can get if you go to the next slide, a sense of, okay, what programs might be interested? How do I get in contact? And at a first cut, what does the funding opportunity look like in that space? And again, you can email us to get set up with that tool and get started. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so I talked about the transition maturity framework and how we're developing complementary tools to address common transition barriers. Now I want to come back to a unique opportunity that I think TMAF poses in this AI era along the theme of this panel. If you go to the next slide. So the TMAF, again, it has these attributes of standardized maturity scales, and they're aligned to the key transition stakeholders. So, I think Adam talked about having like a force multiplier for human judgment, and Andrew talked about increasing the number of firms in the defense industrial base. Get folks into here in a tractable way, and how do you make sense of what's happening as they move through the environment? So as projects self-assess their transition maturity, or as programs assess it for them, you have a set of data that provides unique insight not only into the technical development and manufacturing development, but also into how they're engaging with those customer stakeholders, the programs, the operational problems, and the warfighter. So we go to the next slide. Kind of at a low-hanging fruit level, what that lets you do is something that OEI already does, is you can use the framework to communicate to the ecosystem, hey, this is what we expect our projects to be looking to do from a transition maturity perspective according to the funding lines that are associated with our portfolios. And in doing that, you can also clearly report up that the funding has been allocated in accordance with its appropriation. So there's an element of accountability and transparency that you can get here in a shorthand, standardized language. If you go to the next slide. In addition, there's some interpretability. So this chart right there is showing a notional project updating its transition maturity self-assessment quarterly. And what you can see happens in gray is, okay, the technology through TRL is getting better. They're beginning to be able to manufacture it through MRL. Some warfighters are getting training on WRL. But looks like the operational problem or the prioritization of the problem changed. It reduced. And for that reason, the RRL went down. And lagging behind that, the program lost its interest. So you can see what happened there. And if you go to the next slide, if later the operational problem was reprioritized, you can see that, okay, you had a mature technology that you can manufacture with some warfighter buy-in, that, you know, if the priorities change back, you would want to reignite or get that going again, so you can efficiently and effectively get that technology out when it's needed. And go to the last slide. These are some resources to get started. Next slide. And I would be happy to connect and talk through it more with you and hear any feedback you might have on your particular transition experience. Thanks.
All right, well, that concludes our three briefs. As a reminder, please put any questions you have. Into the Q&A tab, and we will jump right in to get to as many of these as we can. I'm going to start with a question from one of our students here at Naval Postgraduate School. I think this is for Adam, but be curious on other thoughts from the panel after we go to Adam first. What are the accountability mechanisms to ensure humans remain in the loop? And if bad decisions are made using AI tools, how do we hold the decision makers accountable? We seem to be ceding a lot of our decision making to AI and eroding our own knowledge base.
Yeah, I think the tail end of that, eroding the knowledge base, is a big risk of AI and sort of on everybody's minds. Specifically in our framework, we were looking at like mandatory human approval points. So, you know, if you have requirements validation, evaluation methods, awards, recommendations, things like that, you have accountability and have a human in the loop for that. I kept saying throughout traceability and auditability, right? Like if you're using AI assisted recommendations, you got to be able to explain it, document it, link it to supporting evidence, all that kind of stuff. And I think essentially, you know, in our framework and in our research and in our paper is the accountability still remains with the person, right? So if an acquisition professional or a leadership authority or somebody approves the action, you know, they're still responsible for that and keeping to their institutional expertise and doing what we're talking about with traceability and auditability. So there's other pieces of it that we have in it, but essentially, again, in Dr. Cocco said it, like you use it as a force multiplier, but you're still held accountable for your actions in it. It's not just, well, the AI said it, you know, it can't be me. The AI said it. It was the problems with the LLM or whatever I used to make the decision. So keeping humans in the loop and holding them accountable through those, you know, approval points. And, you know, in ours, we tiered it to trigger, like if it's a tier 0, that one that's like very high risk, obviously there's more human approval points. Whereas if it was the tier 3, you may have less in that because it's not as risky as an environment, whatever you're purchasing or acquiring.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that question before we go to the next one? Okay. For Dr. Tai, there's potential for actual reduction in industry competition and dramatic increase in price. How does the government hedge prevent this type of behavior when the focus across PAEs is that each PAE and each service has a rapid capabilities office, therefore lots of potential customers for the same pitch with very little accountability across each stovepiped rapid capability with regard to industry interaction?
Thanks for the question. I think that's a really good call out as well. The government might be, in many instances, trying to procure the same thing or very similar things. And I think this issue I foresee really just worsening or increasing in scale, as I think there's going to be more and more demand away from large bespoke solutions towards smaller piece rate, more commoditized procurement. I think, again, first order is to increase the defense industrial base, or for that matter, any government supplier, not just defense. The number of firms is really important in first order. I haven't shown you today, but I have more simulations with more firms. And even with the same AI algorithms, increasing the number of firms really rapidly pushes the market towards the competitive equilibrium rather than the collusive one. So same AI, kind of same incentives, just with more firms. This behavior is really mitigated. Towards kind of the other part of your question, what can the government do within itself? I'm afraid I honestly don't have too much intelligent things to say. But I think my perspective as an economist is that increasing the number of firms is first order.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Let's go to Alex. How might the TMAF apply to a non-DoD vendor who wants to adapt an existing commercial off-the-shelf software as a service solution for use inside Flank Speed and Nautilus? Does it only apply after a pilot?
Speak to that. So we've actually been presenting defense transition seminar material based on TMAF to some dual-use accelerator cohorts at, say, Mass Challenge and Griffiths Institute. And really, you can view it as a complement to your customer discovery for the commercial market or the defense segment. So, TRL, MRL is kind of the standard thing. But if you look at that combination of TCL, RRL, and WRL, in business speak, you might think of that as your decision-making unit for the purchase. And the goal there is use TMAF to help your business understand what is the customer's need in this case. And for defense, it'll be revolving around, okay, does it help the warfighter? Will they want to use it? And does it address a key operational problem? And can it be integrated into an acquisition program? And the TMAF is meant to give just the minimum, as best as possible, the minimum set of dimensions to simplify that for a non-DoD vendor or someone new to the space, so that they know that there's at least those three types of people that you might want to be tracking and engaging with strategically. I hope that answers the question. Would happy to connect on that. And like I said, we have developed workshop materials on this topic as well.
Great, thanks, Alex. I think this is meant for Adam. How does your proposed framework help bridge the growing gap between entry-level contributors and subject matter experts as AI continues to expand?
I think that probably points back to the human approval points. So the way that I would think about it is, if we have the human approval points, right, and I would assume this question's asking, like, you bring in a new 1102, and then you have your subject matter experts that are seasoned 1102s, and you have to go through like validating requirements, approving all these evaluation methods, making award recommendations. So keeping that subject matter expert in the loop and engaged will keep from the risks that you would have with the junior staff. Because I have kids, and I'm constantly fearing, like, when they learn to really use AI, where are they going to learn the stuff they need to learn in school and things like that? So it's the same with, subject matter experts in acquisition, and you have new 1102s, and they go in and pop whatever they do into ChatGPT or Grok or whatever it is. How do they gain that knowledge, keep that knowledge, instead of relying on the AI? And it's by keeping those SMEs and knowledge transfers in the loop, right? And having that mentorship, the senior level judgment involved. The risk is when you don't have those points, that you will have junior level staff that are trusting what they're getting out of the AI and what it's outputting when it's not actually accurate for whatever you're trying to acquire. So definitely want to lean on those SMEs and make sure they're in the loop and they're helping to knowledge transfer and not just leaning into the AI with the junior folks.
Great, thanks, Adam. For Andrew, do we have an intuition on how artificial intelligence would interact with human actors in a bidding environment? And would this bring more fair pricing or exploit those human bidders?
That's a great question. In my paper, I have a very simplified environment with 2 AI bidders competing, or 3 or more. A natural question is exactly what you asked. What happens if it's, say, 1 human bidder and 1 AI? That's ongoing research for me and probably for other people. I'm sure up the road over in Silicon Valley, lots of people are interested in that, working at Amazon or eBay. My intuition so far, and what seems to be happening, is that the problem is actually worse than under solely humans or solely AI. But they tend to respond when you have a mixed environment. They tend to respond to each other very well. Well for them, not well for the government. So I think the problem is likely to be actually even worse than what we saw.
Great, thanks, Andrew. As the department, this was probably a collective question, but maybe for Adam and Alex. As the department accelerates rapid capability development, where do you see the greatest integration and transition risks emerging between technology maturation efforts and operational PEO execution?
The greatest integration and transition risks emerging and operational program executive office execution. I'm not sure I'm grasping.
I think I could
you
take us.
grasping this?
I think so. Okay, so if like, for example, if you're looking to get emerging technologies into the force more quickly and you have these evolving ways to do that, are there risks in terms of integration in the broad, in a holistic sense? And what is actually the bandwidth for being able to funnel in all of these ideas from the broader innovation ecosystem beyond just the typical contractors? I think if I'm interpreting that right, yeah, I think in that complex and fast evolving space, that's what we view as a benefit of TMAF. It's okay, at a minimum, if you're encountered with that level of variability and rapid evolution, take the top 5 questions on the dimensions. Does it work in the operational environment? Can you produce it? Do you have engagement with a procurement partner? Does it meet a mission need? And will warfighters want to use it? And think about, at any given state, what's my bottleneck? And where do I need to invest time and resources? And what would I want those time and resources to produce? And that could be from the entrepreneur entering the system, or it could be from the program itself as they're evaluating projects. And that's why we think there's a space now for frameworks like this to simplify a space that's changing rapidly and where there's a lot of opportunity for speed. I hope that helps. I don't know, there's a lot in that question.
I think it's thinking about it too late, right? If you don't think about integration and transition up front through something like the TMAF, or just, we see a lot of our sponsors, oh, we've got this thing, it's really great, now how do we integrate it? How do we transition it? And they should be thinking about that further, much more further to the front of the timeline.
Adam, you summed it up better than I did. Like, basically, so you have the WRL. Did you get the warfighter involved early? That's one way to think about it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, gentlemen, that from some of my experience, the training and the tactic development for a new piece of kit, you may be able to technically integrate it in terms of it talks to all the right systems, right, and it has the right data formats. But submarine force example, we were actually inserting too much new capability into a combat system too quickly, and didn't understand all the interrelationships between those capabilities, and the actual submarine tacticians could not apply those, and so it was actually creating, in some cases, worse outcomes, even though you added all this new capability, right? So there's going to be that piece too. That's not just the technical integration, and that gets to your warfighter readiness level.
Exactly.
All right, let's see what else we've got here. So here's a question for Dr. Tai. How can we distinguish between legitimate data-driven bidding and AI competitive bidding and collusion?
Thanks for the question. I think one result that this paper shows is that even if we can distinguish between them, it may not matter because really all the AI algorithms do is intake all the information available and output some behavior that tries to maximize profit for its owner. And under US law, and this is my personal opinion, that's the framework for antitrust is not likely to change. Under the current US antitrust framework, even this kind of tacit collusion that I demonstrated in the paper is unlikely to be banned or prosecutable. So even if we can distinguish between those two things, kind of the AI algorithm doesn't care. There's not such a clean distinction. And we're likely to get the same result either way. So I think what's fundamentally needed is, if not a policy fix, and I would also be reluctant to outright ban the use of AI algorithms. There's huge efficiency gains from them. But barring that, really increasing the competition in the marketplace from humans or AI is kind of the only path that I see that deals with that.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's a new one just popped in. How can we change the acquisition culture to allow human factors and HSI factors, I apologize, I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, to be considered as early as possible? Industry has proven that lean applied research on getting warfighter performance might be the best way for us to evaluate technologies from a human-centered point of view. And I'll open that one up to anybody in the panel.
Yeah, so that one, we consider this a little bit in the TMAF. There are existing scales for that are in the 1 through 9 format. The warfighter readiness level is a natural complement to those. If you want to go a level deeper into the, I think the considerations that you're alluding to, you can consider complementing WRL with those things. Because WRL will say things like, okay, are you getting warfighter engagement, and are they involved in your design, things like that. A natural follow-on to that is how do you effectively engage them in a structured, systematic way, and what kind of data do you get back? How do you take what they've told you and reflect them in the design? So yeah, there's definitely some opportunity to complement the TMAF, especially WRL, with those kind of ideas.
Okay, any other thoughts on that question?
No.
Okay. Let's see, as AI-enabled systems become more integrated into acquisition and operational environments, how do we preserve human decision authority while still accelerating capability delivery and reducing execution risk? Technology acceleration is important, but operational accountability still matters.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a first shot at this one. I think,
yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Essentially, I mean, our research was essentially just putting some sort of framework and rigor around the use of AI, right, in the acquisition and operational environments. So you definitely want to have that human in the loop, making the decision, human decision authority. You also, like you said, everything's about acceleration now, leveraging AI for acceleration and leveraging AI for capability delivery and reducing execution risk. So just building structure in the Department of War and other agencies around keeping that human in the loop and keeping the human agency to the decision authority, but leaning into the speed part. So there's no easy answer to how to speed things up while keeping the human agency, but you just want to stress through your policies, procedures, frameworks, the different levels of authority that you have and decision authority that you have, and you want to stay focused on risk as well. That was a main focus of our research, was if it's very high risk, then you want a lot of human decision authority built into it, right? If there's not, then maybe you can scale it back a little bit, but the agency has to decide, how to fold those in and what each level is and what tier is, similar to what our framework was.
Okay. I think the other thing it highlights for me is that the critical human thinking doesn't become less important, and in some ways becomes more critical, because you have a system that can produce results on more complex systems. And so to continue to have agency and to be able to make sense of what the machine is telling you and understand when it might be off requires more ability to synthesize and understand more complex systems from the human oversight, I think. Let's see, we got a question here about from Stephen Lubosch. Why even introduce AI when it creates more risk and legal issues that add more layers? Why not draw the line now as the law policy lags? And what about ethics? Anybody want to jump on that one?
So I think essentially it's saying forbid the use of AI in acquisitions to get away from the risk and legal issues. But essentially, and this is Adam talking, not MITRE or anyone else, but the ROI for including AI to increase speed and efficiency, as long as you keep the human in the loop, is greater, I feel, than saying thou shalt not pass, you're not going to use AI in any of this stuff. If you use AI, it's no good. Same in proposals, like why not? You may get proposals from folks that use AI but come out with a really good proposal, and you ask them in the RFP to tell you you're using AI, call out where the AI was used, what it was used for, and the government may gain efficiencies from the industry side, as well as, using AI might point out things that, whether you want to believe it or not, with the human bias, your human bias is in it. If the AI calls it out very distinctly and in a way that doesn't have that bias involved in it, as long as you're using the data sets and stuff, right? But essentially, there's more ROI to include it than I think there would be to ban the use now and just put your foot in the sand that we're not going to have AI involved in any of this. And quite honestly, AI is going to be in everything. So I don't think you're going to stop the train in terms of the use of AI within acquisitions and other things.
Anybody else want to jump, add thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Adam. I think the potential gains to efficiency, both on the industry side and the government, make a strong case for keeping its involvement in some way. And the question is, how can we do that safely? I also just want to add that even were we to ban the use of AI, detection and enforcement would remain a problem. At current state, which may change in the future, it's very difficult to detect the use of AI in, let's say, writing or analysis. Certainly, it's difficult for AI to detect use of itself. This may change in the future, but as of right now, even were we to adopt such a policy, it'd be very difficult to enforce.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. Do we have any other last questions? We've got about 5 more minutes.
If we're allowed to break I guess it's not the fourth wall, the wall between us.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew, if you've got something you want to ask.
Yeah, this is related to some earlier questions, actually. How can we ensure that the transaction costs introduced by the HAF or anything similar don't offset the fundamental efficiency gains from the use of AI?
That's a good question. Since it's not a framework that has been, like, we don't have any data on it yet. Man, that's a tough. You got me, Andrew. Come on, Rick.
Sorry, my intention was not to ask a hard question.
No, it is. I think you'd have to look at that trade-off process, right? Like, is the framework is it to institute the framework, keep within the framework, do all the checkpoints that you have within it, depending on the acquisitions that you're using it with? Is the ROI on that better than just not having the framework at all in terms of controlling the AI? But to the other side of it, and the question we just had, it's like, You have the ethics of AI, like how much AI would be injected if you didn't have this framework. Does it become the Wild West with the AI? And so that's sort of a, I don't want to get too acquisition, but it's a trade-off process that you know, DOW and other agencies have to look at is, you know, is implementing this framework really worth it? Or it might be worth it even if it costs more, if it's keeping things ethically and fair and reasonable and allowing new entrants and all that other stuff. So that's a good question.
I also had a question for Alex that I hope that might also be difficult, but that's sorry in advance.
Good luck, Alex.
As the transition maturity framework generates data, and we had talked about this, so we can track the success of programs over time. Could there be incentive to shift resources toward safer, more incremental technologies that can more easily score high? And how could we still use that to encourage more innovative or disruptive technologies?
Yeah, I think here is where the human judgment comes in, because the TMAP does not impose a way that you have to use it. So, and in fact, if you're at a lower, a more future-looking, very innovative, radical kind of innovation type portfolio, then your metric of success in TMAP will be lower. And the transition will be out of that ecosystem into whatever the next one that would take on the funding for the next step. So there's no, the TMAP will allow you to define what success means at a given maturity level in a way that's a common language and traceable or interpretable. And that can be different depending on your application or on what your program's goals are. So there should be, should be able to use it at the cutting edge and in the more integration focused engineering side of things. And you can, a lot of times if you're at the very early stage, you might also consider how in depth you want to go in the levels. You might just be using those top 5 questions. You might group them in 3 so you have it in less granularity. It's meant to be a decision support tool that you use actively with your own judgment, and you're trying to strategically allocate resources in the end.
Great, thank you.
All right, we got one more question. It might be the last one. We'll see how it goes. Vulnerabilities will continue to grow as AI use increases, and more will find sophisticated ways to access non-public information when billions of dollars are at play yearly in government acquisitions. This will go further than just the current NPC API vulnerabilities, since more government systems will be interconnected with AI. Hopefully, there are restrictions enforced, at least from the government personnel, to utilize AI to develop acquisition-sensitive documents, such as IGCEs, source selection, protected information, and so on. What is your take on vulnerabilities that any of you see that we should be aware of? Good question.
I mean, the general one is just, if I'm a KO and I go out and say, you know what, I'm going to pop this in ChatGPT or whatever, and now it's out there, right? And it could be source selection sensitive. So I myself, as an X1102, like none of that gets mixed in, and I'm very sensitive to that. But you might have, circling back to the previous, a brand new 1102 that's like, oh, hey, here's my RFP, here's a proposal, let me pop this in ChatGPT and see what it tells me if they're, qualified and should be awarded, and how they rack and stack against my evaluation criteria, without thinking that is now out there, right? It's in the ether, it's available to the AI, to everyone else. So that's what sort of scares me in terms of processing this all through acquisitions, is you can't really stop that, right? Like anybody can, even from their government, well, there might be some ways with the government computers to stop using those, but people will screw up, right? And that's, once you screw up, it's out there now. It's not like, so yeah, that's the one thing that scares me, is regulating what they can use and dictating tools. And I think that's just early education of, this is source selection, and probably more legalese that we'll get in source selections of, you are not to put this in any of the following tools, or use any of these, so you're allowed to use this, but you have to use
all
it
right.
in a
Sorry, I guess we're out of time, Adam.
Oh,
so you're getting the hook. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I'm hooked, but
all
yeah,
right.
That's what scares me, is
okay. Thanks everybody today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Been a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Alex. Thanks, Andrew.